Thanks all of you for coming to this presentation. Obviously, child welfare is important, but it's not often something that we see a large crowd for. So me and Ashley were talking before the presentation began, and she said this is the kind of audience that chooses to be, chooses this kind of a thing to be at, and that's exactly the kind of audience you want. So thank you so much for coming. We are going to be talking about child welfare, the legislative session, as well as just what child welfare looks like in Texas right now. Got a wonderful panel to talk with us about it, but just as a warning, Texas child welfare system is very big, it's very complex, and it often provokes very strong reactions. It employs thousands of people, affects tens of thousands of youth, has a biennial budget of more than $3 billion in state and federal funds, and that's just the Department of Family and Protective Services. There's another department that also is part of the child welfare system that is separate, and it's faced increased attacks nationwide from the right and the left. The right has a strong narrative about parents' rights, that it's eroding parents' rights as a department, that it's somehow extra legal in its work. From the left, it's not unusual to hear that it's a tool for racial oppression because of, rightly, as they point out, the disparities in the families that are affected by removals, by other things. So they're doing a lot. I don't want this to come off as something that is just, let's hammer on DFPS and HHSC, because that's definitely not what we're here to do. It's just, it's an organization that is under a lot of stress and under a lot of attacks regularly. And for the last 13 years, it's been under federal litigation in Texas. So want to talk about that and a lot of other things. And to help me do that, we've got this wonderful panel. So let me introduce some folks to you. Josey Garcia, my far left, represents San Antonio's far west side in the Texas House. She offers a unique perspective tonight, not only fighting for children in the Texas Legislature, but also as a former foster youth. So thank you for being here today. Feel free to clap. Senator José Menendez, who served in the Texas Legislature for more than 2 decades, is that right? 2000 rather. And passing 230 bills that benefit children, seniors, veterans, and Texas families. Thank you so much, Senator Menendez, for being here. Lori Duke is co-director of the Children's Rights Clinic at the University of Texas School of Law, where she supervises law students who represent abused and neglected children. So thanks for what you do, Lori. Feel free. Mercedes Bristol is executive director of Texas Grandparents Raising Grandchildren, which helps grandparents navigate the foster care system and ensures these families have resources that they need. And thank you so much for what you do. How many chapters do you have open across the state now? Do you know?
4 or 5.
4 or 5. That's all under your leadership. So thanks so much for helping us. And last but not least, Tom Molnar is COO, right? COO of Divinity Family Services, which provides adoption and foster services for 59 counties. You're also a former CPS worker, right? I think I saw you quoted in a number of articles that go back. Yeah, he was very critical about about the organization that he worked for at the time. I don't think he's going to be as critical tonight, just for professional reasons. So, all right, deep breath. We've gotten through our list. Thank you so much, everybody. So just to start, because it's so timely and because it's happening now, I did just want to briefly touch on the federal litigation. Texas child welfare system was declared broken a decade ago by federal judge Janice Jack, with kids coming out worse than they went in. Jack obviously is a bit of a firebrand. She speaks her mind. She's been viewed as by child welfare advocates as a champion, and by many lawmakers, especially conservative ones, as doing more harm than good. So she's a controversial figure in that fight. A few months ago, a 3-judge panel of the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals removed her from the case. She's overseen for more than a dozen years. In that time, her team of court monitors had highlighted the state's continued egregious failures over the 4 years they were releasing reports. Those reports also documented many areas the state was improving. There's a lot we don't know about what happens next, but I wanted to start the conversation with a little bit of a crystal ball, a little bit of speculation, assuming we got a different judge and maybe that case ended up going away. I'm just wondering, Senator Menendez, you've been with the legislature as long as that case has been going on and beyond. What effect does that litigation have on lawmakers? I hear a lot of complaints that it doesn't allow them to do X or it doesn't allow the department to do Y. From your perspective, what impact did the litigation have on making rules for the department?
So the only negative that I saw was that sometimes, due to the fact that it felt to some of the providers that the monitors could potentially be ticky-tack about reasons why they would get written up, so much so to the point that people would leave the system. And so in many ways, I think it exacerbated the perfect storm that we had with COVID, where people decided to leave, not be foster care parents anymore, and we were losing placement possibilities for placements. So then, therefore, the child without placement, the CWAP problem, children without placement problem, increased dramatically and quickly. And at a time when we needed more facilities, more places to have placements, we were getting more people leave the system. And so I think that's the only concern. I appreciated the brutal honesty that Judge Jacks brought. I know that the monitors cost the state millions and millions of dollars that I would have rather see put into the system. But I also think that the state of Texas has not done the appropriate job of correcting the system to keep children in the safest possible places. And that sometimes that means with families, sometimes that doesn't. I mean, and I think at the end of the day, we should not be seeing people who are critical of the state for the benefit of children as the enemy. We should be listening and, where appropriate, make those corrections.
For Representative Garcia, just looking nationwide at these kinds of judicial oversight situations, usually it's consent decrees. It's not often settlements like Texas has had. The one thing that kind of is universal with them is they do tend to protect the budgets of the departments. And I'm wondering what you think would happen or what you see as potentially happening if this case went away. Do you worry about DFPS's budget as it pertains to serving kids? Is it something that was protected that now won't be, or is that overblown in Texas?
I think that any department's very protective of their budget. We are a fiscally conservative state that has done a very good job at making sure that we have funding, but we have ample funding. So when we're witnessing things occur like caregivers, foster parents, not even be able to stay within the system fighting for children. And I do want to say, I want to thank every single one of you that have chosen this as your career, because to constantly listen to the pain of children that may or may not be yours, that belong to somebody that you go to church with, or you're a kinship caregiver, as in, you had, your grandchild, right? I thank you for that, because it's so hard to fight for a child that oftentimes is very damaged, trauma beyond measure. And when it comes to those things, we have to look at the budget as this being a non-negotiable. When it comes to the safety and the preservation of children in a state where we always talk about how we put family first, how we put children first, how we put life first. We have to put our money where the mouth is, because we're witnessing millions and millions of dollars be spent on things that are, great, but aren't life impacting.
I'm wondering, just for both of you, whoever wants to handle this question, I was talking to a former DFPS commissioner a few months ago about a story I was working on, and they had said, these kinds of, it's specifically around child safety, and he was talking about how the laws that get passed in the legislature, the letter of them is one thing, but the aggregate of the laws is something else, and they send a message to the department. They send a legislative mandate. I'm just wondering, the last few sessions, what you think the legislature has been telling DFPS and what that message has been.
I think one of the most damaging things that I saw, and And I've had a long conversation with him because I don't think he's a bad person or he means to harm any children. But this change in the standard to remove children that was drafted and passed by Chairman Frank, in my opinion, was a mistake. I think we've seen the sharp decrease in the number of cases come before the system for removals. And I understand that maybe in North Texas somewhere there was an abuse of this, but to change a state law and change the language to create such a high hurdle before you remove children to where it's almost like, well, you have to see the danger about to hurt the child before you can remove them. It's not in the best interest of the children. And I think we need to address that. I think that still needs to be addressed. I think that sends a message. That really, in my opinion, that talk about changing a law that says, you know what, the most important thing here is leave the kids, leave the family intact. We'll see if they get hurt, or something. And I don't think that's what they intend, but I think that's what the unintended consequence is.
For those of you who aren't familiar, in 2021, James Frank passed or authored a bill called HB 567, which changed the definition of neglect and removed non-emergency removals. So now the only way to remove a child is if they are in immediate danger, which can be a very difficult thing for investigators to chart when they are not there in the moment. And so we did see a precipitous drop in removals, 30-40% that next year. More on that another time. I would love to talk more about that, but that is the focus of some of my other reporting that we won't get to tonight. I do want to ask, just in general, what are your legislative priorities for this next session? And actually, even before that, because we are about to go into the session, it's a month away. There's already 75 bills filed that have Department of Family and Protective Services. Just through a text search of the legislature, there were 250 4 years ago. There were 300 2 years ago. How do you get those bills the attention they need to even survive? And then maybe talk about what you think you want to bring to the floor next time.
Well, the first thing that we need to get a bill to survive is you, all the advocates in the field, because when our bills go to committee, who shows up that day to advocate really means a lot. Now, does it mean that 1,000 of us show up sometimes? But if you have a group of, say, 4 or 5 subject matter experts. And when I say subject matter experts, I mean real life experience. I don't mean you have to have a PhD or, be a lawyer. I mean, you have to have experienced the issue and advocate for why Texas needs to change this. That's the number one step, is we need you. We need you to contact your senators. Senator Menendez is always going to support family issues, always. But there's 30 other senators that, have to agree with us as well. And so we have to do our part in making sure that we contact all members, the House as well. We do very well in the House passing these types of pieces of legislation, only for them to go over to the Senate and die. These are types of things that happen. A lot of people will ask me, but Rep. Garcia, you guys said that you were fighting for these things and it didn't happen. They don't understand how many processes it takes to actually become signed by the governor to be a law. And so I would say the most important thing is for all of you to get engaged in this process. Reach out to your representatives, reach out to us in our offices, have a legislative day at the Capitol where we go around and have a cohesive plan of who we need to talk to make sure that the bills we care about get the chance to see the floor.
So I've got 5 bills filed that are potentially, hopefully, have a positive impact. We've got one that's about to be, it's still in drafting. Hopefully it'll be out soon and we can file it. But they range from everything from a crisis nursery so that we don't have to have, if a family is in crisis and they just need someone to watch their child for 2-3 hours, it'd be great if the state could license a facility that people wouldn't have to go pay, because typically if you're in crisis, it's because you have nowhere else to go. And so other states have done this, and there's some good people working on this idea, and this is brought to my attention, and so we're hoping that we can get this filed and passed. I also think that we have to have parity in the kinship payments. I think that's critical. It's something we've been working on for a long time. I mean, geez, I have to think back when Mercedes came in with all 5 grandkids in my office, maybe been 10 years ago. And I was just blown away by, why does the money not follow the child? Just because that child is not in foster care does not mean that the child doesn't need diapers, doesn't need formula, doesn't need all of the expensive things that many times the grandparent who's retired doesn't have. So why does the state expect, just because you're related to this child, that you magically have money? So I think that needs to be done. I think so. This is why child-related income needs to follow the child. We need to eliminate the age requirements for former DPS youth to claim their free tuition. We also need to do an outreach program for DFPS youth to understand that they can have free tuition, that there are universities that will give wraparound services that will encourage former foster care kids to go to college and change their lives. And then finally, I think we need to change the kinship care eligibility to remove barriers for kinship caregivers' experience when applying for foster care. We need to make it easier for relatives to be able to take care of the children, so that when, like Mercedes, they get the call in the middle of the night, and that Child Protective Services worker is saying, we understand you're related to this child. Can you take them now, or do I take them somewhere? And so we need to make it easier, because all of the studies show that children that are with family end up doing better than those that are put into the foster care system.
Mercedes, I think it's a good time for you to pipe up on this issue. How important is kinship parity for, and what does it mean for people that don't understand what that is? And talk about kinship parity.
Well, like Senator said, right? You get that call in the middle of the night, and here you have 5 kids, and 2 need high chairs. Car seats, and you have to take them to doctor's appointments and all that. But they don't come with money, and so here in Texas, you have, for every 1 child in the foster care system, there are 24 children outside the foster care system that don't get any financial assistance. And that's why we're at Senator Menendez's office and Representative Garcia's office, and working on some of these legislative pieces that can help kinship caregivers to be able to help these children and provide for them. We are saving the state millions of dollars by taking these children in without any compensation whatsoever.
And so when you do get a kinship placement, when you go through the process, which can be taxing, can be burdensome, there is some amount of money, but it's half what a regular foster care home would be?
Well, since they passed that House Bill 4 3 legislations ago, yes, it's half of what foster care gets, but it's only for 18 months, and then they drop them. So sometimes we have families calling our agency that they're going to be homeless because they got a house with 5 kids now, because they were getting money for the 5 children, but now that the money stopped, now they're not going to be able to pay the rent.
Yeah. Tom, did you have anything to add on? No.
I think it's important for any legislation that gets passed for helping families, like the kinship, monies that are available to families, the half of that amount. And we worked with Senator Menendez several sessions ago to have judges explain during the pendency of the case, while the children are in conservatorship, that relatives can become licensed as foster parents, which changed probably 20 years ago. And then they can get the full amount if they're licensed. And it's a very important piece of what happens. About 50% of the children placed by CPS or that are in CPS conservatorship end up with relatives. If they can become licensed early, unfortunately, a great deal of the children in CPS care do not return to their parents. So then you're either looking at permanent managed conservatorship with PCA, which is an amount equal to probably like an adoption subsidy would be, or an adoption. but they have to become licensed to get those things. And unfortunately, a lot of families, I think, might be start feeling comfortable with getting the kinship payments and not see the value that's added when they become licensed kinship caregivers. And additionally, the federal government has relaxed the rules on becoming a licensed kinship caregiver, so states can now have two separate policies toward licensing, and we're waiting for Texas to adopt those.
We talked a little bit about children without placement earlier, and I remember one of the many federal hearings I would listen to with Judge Jack had to do with Oklahoma's efforts with kinship and bringing that parity, and how immediately you saw a reduction in child without placement issues. If this is, and I have heard conservative lawmakers talk positively about kinship care and kinship parity, but what is the major obstacle that you guys are hearing? Because this is not a new idea.
Well, on the House side, one of the arguments was we didn't want people to start giving away their children. There was this rhetoric that there would be a mass effort to now abandon parental responsibilities on grandparents just to collect a check. And so it's been very humbling to be able to share some of the life experiences that I've had with my colleagues on the floor, because we're able to kind of change some of the mindset around the fiscal conservative side of humanity. And one of those examples is actually working with the Day One Bags. Day One Bags, wonderful organization that makes sure that children in foster care don't have to carry around an HEB bag or a black trash bag. And I remember listening to this on the House floor. You know, you kind of get a heads up on where bills are going to go and if they're going to pass or not. And I was hearing rumors that the bill was not going to pass because of the fiscal responsibility of it. And so I shared my story of being a trash bag child, of having all of my life's belonging in a huge black trash bag, and that was indicative of what my future held. And by sharing that story with my counterparts, we were able to flip the vote by 2 votes and had 2 very conservative members see the value in a child's life as opposed to the dollars behind the bag.
Is it all wrong incentives? Is that the main rhetoric around it, or is there more?
I've heard the same concern that by somehow incentivizing, financially making it somehow attractive to take over your children or to give up the rights to your children, that you would sign up for this. I think that's one of the most insulting things I can hear. I think it's offensive. I think it's odd to me that you would think, especially if you're, this shouldn't even be a partisan issue. These are kids. These are children. These are families and who find themselves in a time of need. And why are we discussing, are we going to somehow incentivize families to break up or to hand over their children? We're already going to pay, if the grandparents or other family members are there, we're going to pay the foster care system to do this. So what is the issue? I don't understand where I think somehow they're just always looking at the financial bottom line. And it's sad. It's unbelievably sad to think about that. But one of the things that the takeaway from what Representative Garcia just said is that, and this is where, to her point, in terms of if you have the possibility of coming up to testify on a bill, bills are nothing but words on a piece of paper. They're just numbers and words until you put a reality behind it, until you put what we used to say, a face to the issue. When you shared your personal story, and people could envision you as a child holding that trash bag, that changed that. That gave that bill, what if that were me? What if that were my child? And that's what you have to do. And that's why it's so powerful. That's why Mercedes, when she's testified, has been powerful, because she's there as a grandparent, not a lobbyist. And nothing against lobbyists or people who get paid, experts to do this. But when you're the person that's going through this, and you come up and you testify, when I was working on David's Law, the parents who lost children to suicide, there was no more powerful testimony than their personal loss. So if there are people watching this and they feel like, nobody cares, they need to come up and put a face on the problem, on the issue. That hopefully, because we'll get through the cynicism, the cynical approach that sometimes after too many years being there, people get.
Mercedes, did you have more to add?
Right now in Texas, there are 296,000 children outside of the foster care system. And I think that we call it the hidden foster care. And those are the children that don't get recognized, that don't get the benefits, that don't get to get even even a one-day bag. They don't get any of that. They just get dropped off with a kinship caregiver. And so this is why we want to advocate. I remember Senator Menendez telling me when I came to his office one time, and he says, I only see a couple of you. Where's all the rest of the grandparents? So last legislation, we took 82 grandparents to the to the session, and we got recognized at the House and at the Senate side. But we're educating grandparents to be able to speak up and tell their story, because a lot of legislators, it's right. They're out there and they don't hear about us, and they hear, but they don't see us. So now we're being seen.
Lord Duke, didn't want to confuse you for our in-house scribe. Did you, is this something, this rhetoric you're hearing about from, some of the legislative colleagues around cashing in on the system? You work directly with kids. You represent kids in the system. You're often in talks with their families. Is that what you're seeing?
No. I've been doing this work since 1995. I have yet to meet a family that is doing this for the money. A couple of things I want to mention. Most of the kinship families I work with, I know we're talking about grandparents, but I'm also working with aunts and uncles, and almost without exception, there are a couple of exceptions, my families do not have funds. And so when you're literally saying, can you take your grandkids? Can you take your nephew? Can you take your niece? You're working with families that very often are working low-wage jobs. They may be cobbling together 2 and 3 jobs. They don't have health insurance, and they often have kids. So most of the time, obviously, because I get cases after they've been filed and my clients are with that relative or we're looking to place with that relative, they're already saying yes. And they're doing it despite the financial hit it is going to cause. And what I find shocking is sometimes I get caseworkers who are surprised that they need to give a gift card to HEB or a gas card to help with that, or maybe a clothing voucher. They will say, well, the relative didn't tell me. And it's like, you just dropped 3 kids off at the house. Of course they are going to need help. That should be a given. The other thing I want to say is most of my relatives are really stressed for time, and you've just put 1, 2, 3, 4 kids in the home. And along with those kids, their own kids are there. And so now you've got a caseworker, a CASA, an attorney. Everybody's coming by to see what's going on. You also have therapy. You may have speech therapy, occupational therapy, and physical therapy, and you need to do all of those. Oh, yeah, and you need to take the kids to a 3-day doctor visit. So imagine trying to do your job right now with all of that chaos that goes on. It doesn't go anywhere. And so my relatives are incredibly stressed. And so instead of the system coming in and saying, let us help you help them, it instead says, here's a checklist. We need to do all these things. Yes, my clients need to go to the doctor. Yes, they need to get their therapies. But there needs to be a system to help with these relatives and help them directly with actual payments. The other thing I want to say is, you don't know how many motions I've filed to ask for daycare and aftercare. And the answers I get back are, well, why does the 6-year-old need aftercare? I don't know, because the parents work, the foster parents I've done it for foster parents, I've done it for relatives. They work full-time jobs, or maybe they work 30 or 35 hours, but they don't work 40, so somehow they don't need this assistance either. We need to be looking at the relatives that step up for our kids and supporting them so they can take care of the kids, because my clients do best when they are either returned to their parents or with relatives, and sometimes with foster families. It really just depends on the case. But the disparity between the foster families and the kinship families is really disturbing. Just so y'all know, foster families will continue to get paid until adoption. Fictive kinship families, relatives will get paid for 18 months. And then sometimes it takes longer to do an adoption. And so they won't get any funding there. The other push I want to make is adoption and permanency care assistance is $400 a month per child. That's it. That has been the same amount, I believe, since 1995 when I started doing this work. That amount, in my opinion, needs to be raised.
Tom, any thoughts on the rates?
Yeah, I think that I would be a big fan of raising the rates. I think inflation, everything is more expensive now than it used to be. Housing costs are just phenomenally difficult for a young couple with children of their own trying to get started, let alone having 2 or 3 of your own children, and CPS knocks on the door and says, hey, would you take your nieces and nephews in? Which we were talking before we started about, we work with so many families that maybe wait through the case. It's a year and a half, and then they finally decide they want to become licensed. And that drags out the process a bit. Judges get very frustrated, that it's taking so long for an adoption to take place, or close out the case with PMC with PCA, which is another form of reimbursement to help raise those children to the age of 18 at least. And also one of the things you want to do when they get licensed and you can close a case quickly is get CPS and our case managers and everybody else out of that family's business so they can just have normal lives. It's it's not a natural situation to have several strangers, and it could be several different caseworkers during the pendency of that case. It could be, we could have 2 or 3 case managers, depending on how long that goes on. It could be different attorneys, different CASA people. Luckily, most of the time, CASA is assigned. They stay with the case for the entire life of the case. So definitely get them the help, get them licensed from my perspective as a provider of foster care and adoption services, and close the case as quickly as possible.
One thing that we didn't talk about, and we could probably talk for hours about, is mental health care for children in Texas. Is there any realistic kind of effort this session that could happen to help address the desert of mental health care for children in Texas? Well, mental health in general, not just for children, but foster children, kids that are not in foster care, just in general.
Well, I will say, in light of recent news with the healthcare industry and insurance, there's been studies that have proven that insurance companies have systemically denied ABA and mental health therapies. So now that there's a national highlight on those types of things, we're really going to be pressing this session. There's a couple of work groups that the current Speaker of the House has put together, one of them being insurance. That's a huge barrier. And the fact that we have federal funding that's available to Texans, that's something that we're going to continue to champion to accept. And that's where the personality and the word politics come into play, where, the federal government has, I believe, 40 million, sir, something to that effect, or more than that. Yeah. So that much money available for uninsured Texans, to include uninsured children that are in kinship care. But because it stems from Obamacare, Texas doesn't want to accept it. It's like having a piggy bank with $40 million that says, hey, this is for your uninsured Texans, you can have it, but you can't help it because Obama built the piggy bank. We have to change that rhetoric and change that mindset.
Just thinking out loud here, but I mean, just in general, how confident are you that anything you guys did in this session, even if it passed, would address just the lack of mental health providers in Texas. It seems like Texas is just a real hard place to get mental health care.
Without a doubt. And if you have insurance, it's hard. If you don't, it's almost impossible. One of the things that we could do is, and we've done this in the past when we've had shortages of doctors in rural Texas or other places, we could, look at loan forgiveness, we could figure out ways to create incentives. The other thing we could do is create a state that tries to let doctors practice the things that they went to school to do, and not decide to try to legislate their profession. Unfortunately, we have a state that seems to be more worried about whether something's woke or social and emotional. These sort of trigger words that are seem to set off some of our colleagues in Austin. And at the end of the day, we need to meet people where they are. And here's the thing: this is where I think where we're really missing the boat. Currently in Texas, the average of number of counselors per students, it's one counselor to about 800 students. And typically, we've done so much to allow the public school system and TEA to tell counselors, we know you're a counselor for everything, but we want you just to focus on academic counseling. We want you to worry about their STAR tests. We want you to worry about their SATs. We want you to worry about how they're doing in class. And I mean, I've had, once again, I'll go back to working on the cyberbullying bill, where I had a student get up and say, the last time any counselor asked me about how I was doing emotionally was in grade school. So why are we surprised when we're having more and more kids disassociate and take the bullying that they're receiving and, cause them to disassociate from their community, become loners, find disruptive or even harmful ways of interacting, and then they want to blame everything. Then they want to talk about mental health once there's been a crisis. But I think we need to be saying, how can we help kids where they are? So what good would it do to get someone an appointment if the family can't get them to it? So that's why I think we have to figure out ways to let us meet kids. But if you talk about anything mental health in schools, people's heads explode. And because they think that you're trying to indoctrinate their kids somehow. You're trying to tell them their kids something's wrong with their kid. Instead of just saying trying to let the kid come and tell someone, I need help. And because sometimes the help they need from is coming from places that they don't necessarily can talk to openly.
We also have to remember the cultural implications behind mental health. Just speaking from my own experience, you never tell anybody about what happens in that house. You never tell anybody about what I said to you. You never tell anybody about what I did to you. Like, those are ingrained in us. And unfortunately, a lot of children and grandparents and parents, are suffering from some type of trauma that does not allow them to trust an outside professional because, number one, you're not going to admit the truth because you're afraid your kids are going to get taken away. You're not going to admit the truth because you're afraid you're going to be found neglectful. You're not going to say that you leave your grandchildren at home while you're at work at night because you're afraid they're going to get taken away from you. As a single mom, I remember I was 19 years old when I adopted my 3-year-old brother because I couldn't bear the thought of him growing up the way I did. I remember being a young airman on Lackland Air Force Base, able to qualify for WIC and food stamps as an E5 staff sergeant here at Lackland Air Force Base. I was divorced at the time. 2 of my children have special needs. I worked 2 jobs on top of the military just to put a roof over my children's head. So when we're thinking about now taking out time, like you mentioned, to go and take our children to these mental health appointments or to even admit that I need a mental health appointment, I remember my work now getting on to me because I'm having to leave work, and my children are now a liability to me getting promoted in my job. So when you're asking somebody about mental health, we got to be realistic of what does that really mean? because we can have mental health offered to us every day, all day. And one thing that's real beautiful that happened from COVID, and I don't know if those two words would ever go together in a normal setting, but something that's real beautiful that happened during COVID is Zoom, is Microsoft Teams, is the fact that I got 2 text messages on my phone today reminding me that my sons with autism have video mental health appointments tomorrow. Zoom and accessibility now is such a beautiful thing. But to have all of that, we also need to look at the digital divide. I'm blessed that tonight we were able to bless 31 students from the far west side with laptops. They were in tears. They said, "Thank you for a Christmas." That speaks to us on how we take for granted the fact that we have good wireless on our phone, or that we can pull out our laptop at Starbucks, or that we can, have access to health care. So those are the things, too, that we really have to think about as a community and as people who always want to say, what can we do to make a difference? And so those are things that I think that we need to take into consideration.
I just want to add to that a lot of times when the kinship caregivers take these children, we don't know the extent of their abuse. We don't know the extent of their what happened to them. So when we get them and they're misbehaving, and so I remember my 6-year-old, they kept calling me at work and telling me, that he's destroyed the room. They've evacuated the 2nd grade classroom because of his behavior. And I wasn't educated of what to do. I didn't know, so I spanked him when I got home. You better behave tomorrow, And then they were diagnosed with ADHD, post-traumatic stress disorder, and oppositional defiance. I said, what the heck is that? My mother would have spanked me, all of that out of me, But we're not educated. We don't know. How we were raised is not how we raise these children now. And these children come from trauma. This child had post-traumatic stress disorder because of a spanking he was getting when he was little. So I didn't know that as a grandmother. We don't know all these things. I didn't know the 3-year-old had RAD, reaction attachment disorder. She never attached to her mom. And so how could she attach to me? This child was hiding underneath things. I didn't know they had all these things. So it's very hard for us to now get mental health illness. I didn't know I suffered from depression, and I went into a depression when I got these kids, and I had to go to the doctor, and I had to go, because we don't identify what we're going through. We're just on survival mode. We have to survive. And so took me months and months to get them diagnosed. But the school helped me at that point. They said something else is going on. And I started learning and educating myself on what all this meant. But then there was a lack of services. We couldn't get the services for the kids. And we, like I said, right now there's so many children that are out of the system that these children don't get the Medicaid, because grandparents don't have custody. They can't go apply for the benefits. So there is another layer of trying to get the help.
Well, it's about 15 minutes left. I want to make sure to offer the opportunity for anyone who has a question to ask it. We have a microphone set up over here, so just walk over if you have one. In the interim, I'm going to ask some more questions about other things that are depressing. So real quickly, 2024 has been one of for me, my career, like watching time after time after time, cases come up of children who died while they were known to the DFPS system over and over and over. So Mercedes Lozoya's perpetrators came up this year. Ronnie Salazar's perpetrators came up this year. Benji Cervera, all 3 of these kids starved or beaten to death in Bexar County. Just wondering, on the child safety front, what would you guys like to see? What are the fixes, if there are any? Because I think I want to say Mercedes Lozoya, in the trial of her killer, the defense attorneys, pointed out, there were 5,000 pages of CPS documents on this child. She didn't show me the 5,000 pages, but just to say that this was long documented. What can be done to do something about that, if anything?
There's no silver bullet. There's no bill that's automatically going to change all of this. It's going to automatically save everything. What we all need to look at and think about is the fact that poverty impacts almost every part of our lives. We have discussed on this panel how having the resources to get the things you need will impact. We heard about your job getting on you because you needed to take your children. And so, as a city, as a state, as a county, we need to be looking at how do we help empower. One of the things that I think really irks many of us who hear people beat their chests about the fact that Texas is such a pro-life state, which is fine. If that's what you, but if you're going to be pro-life all the way. Don't just be pro-birth. That's great. I mean, but once the child is here, aren't you going to take care of it or help us take care of it? Because just about every single one of these, every child, through no fault of their own, didn't ask to be here. And it's the ultimate lottery in terms of who you're born to. So if you're born to a couple of 18-year-old kids that don't have any resources, what? Then what? And maybe they're addicted to drugs or addicted to alcohol. So we've got to focus on a much broader change on how to make our society healthier from a poverty perspective, alcohol and drug dependency, overall awareness of the need for mental health for everybody. And I think it's like back when I started in politics, we used to talk about illiteracy, and we used to talk about, well, which end do you start? Making sure the children can read, or what about adult illiteracy? They're both important. And so you have to just address this from a comprehensive perspective. And then for my colleagues who, maybe want to make sure that we address this in the most conservative way, which is it's only aggravating when it's especially aggravating when you think about the $33 billion budget surplus we had last session. $33 billion above and beyond our needs to pay for every expense we had as a state. And we couldn't take care of kinship? And we couldn't add more to things? It's offensive. It's almost criminal.
Lori Duke, any additional thoughts on child safety or any of the things that have come up? I see you taking notes.
Oh, there's a lot.
A lot of notes.
A couple of things I want to say. We're talking about trauma, and you're absolutely right. Many people don't understand how trauma impacts behavior, and my clients are trauma victims. And I do think there's an awareness within the professionals who are working with these kids that it's not just bad behavior. It's not why are they acting this way. It's what is causing this behavior and why are they doing it. So there has been a switch and a change, but you also have to educate the caregivers, right? Because then if you can see the behavior as something that's a trauma response, that is a survival mechanism that has kept that kid alive and safe, you might change your perception on why they're doing what they're doing. You may also figure out the trigger points and figure out how to manage the behavior. I absolutely agree with what both of y'all are saying. I would love to see more of my clients in college. I would absolutely love to see barriers for kinship providers given. One of the crazy things that I see is that sometimes I have court-ordered placements with relatives, and they cannot get licensed because of past criminal or CPS behavior, and so they're left without anything. Yet, a judge has ruled, and oftentimes CPS agrees that this is the best placement for that child. So it makes no sense. I've seen relatives who were turned down for adoption because they couldn't get adopted. They couldn't get the licensing. So sometimes things come out of policy that should people with criminal histories be able to foster and adopt or be kinship placements? Sometimes they should be. And the money should be following the child. I think that's a great idea. There really is so much. When you talked about Judge Jack, and kids worse when they went in. My teenagers who have failed adoptions, because we haven't even touched on that, that happens, right? And then they come back in the system, and then they go to residential treatment centers. And I will say the one thing that the federal lawsuit has done is it's made people look at these residential treatment centers. I've been to a lot of residential treatment centers to visit my clients. I wouldn't want my dog to stay in some of them. Some of them were in buildings that had no windows, that just were horrible. So I do think having some pressure from the top about what is going on in these placements is really important for the safety of our kids. The other thing I want to add, and it's a biased statement, have good attorneys representing these children and their parents, because we can push things that CPS can't or won't. And we can also make sure the system is serving the families that it's supposed to be serving.
I'd just like to add one more thing before we close. And I think one of the answers for children like Mercedes Lasoya and other children who are in the system that during the investigation and the children weren't removed and then something bad happens is data. Currently, Senator Cornyn, I know Mercedes Group is working with Senator Cornyn's office on a federal level, and I'm in a conversation with his staff also. Excuse me. And they are there's a bill currently that Senator Cornyn has to gather data in all 50 states and territories about the hidden foster care arrangements. You know, children placed with relatives during a CPS investigation, and then having the case closed and the children stay there. It's very important to get that data and to have that to see, are children better off with the current legislation that we have as far as children being able to be removed, as Senator Menendez was talking about. So I'm looking forward to seeing that come to fruition.
Well, I don't have any more questions. I'm going to give one more chance for the audience to throw up any questions. Yes, ma'am. And I'll just repeat it if you want to just say it out loud.
What does accountability look like?
What does accountability look like for foster care?
For the people that are doing all this harm to our children, that are allowing for this much harm to be done to our children. I mean, this is,
for perpetrators, or for the caseworkers, or for the failed system. For the system. What does accountability look like?
That's what Judge Jack was. That's what Judge Jack was trying to do, and well, yes, and the problem too is though, the state was seeing the monitors cost so much that they were, instead of seeing her as someone that was helping them, they saw her as an adversary, and so we just need to align our goals. And we need to align goals, meaning how do we best help all these children? But we also need to think beyond just the immediate Band-Aid of what the symptom is and look much deeper at the root causes. And I think that's the problem, that some people don't want to look at the root causes for how this becomes generational and institutionalized. Because then you're spending a lot more money in areas that maybe aren't supportive of your agenda. I don't know. I don't want to make this a partisan thing, because I don't think it should be. And I want to take it out of that realm. I think too many things have become partisan for which are stupid, because health's not partisan, education's not partisan, and we just need to bring it back, because this is just about helping people.
what about economic impact? You know, when you see the long-term effects of this harm that we're doing to children and the outcome of that.
There's a multi-pronged answer there. I'll tell you what we do for accountability. I know that there's a lot of, we're looking at the law enforcement agencies, we're looking at DFPS, we're looking at local advocacies, interpretation of the laws, CPS. I mean, you name it, those are all the accountability pieces, right? And don't forget about us. We're the accountability piece. So one way I'll tell you is we had an advocate that works with children who are abused who had a child make an outcry. They followed all the steps that was appropriate. It was in another county. Well, they called my office because they said, look, I reported this. There's video evidence. They didn't even hear me and they closed the case. He knew something was wrong. He knew that that was not okay. And he took it upon himself to reach out to my office and say, look, in my 20 years of doing this work, this is the first time a child reached out to me for help. And now we just basically left her in the house of her abuser that now the cops have showed up at, knowing because she told on them. And so what we have to do as legislators is hold accountability there. That day, our office made calls not only to that local Comal County law enforcement, but to DFPS, to the region CPS, and we got everybody involved. I think we even contacted Senator Menendez's office. And what's important and what happened there is that child ended up being removed from that home, and the family was able to get the help that they needed, because it was a situation where grandfather and grandmother now got child who has some behavioral issues, who, you know, calls them everything other than, you know, I love you, or says bad things to them, you know, and so you got this piece where they needed help, but you would have never known because the case was immediately dropped, shut down, because they said that the kid was a problem kid and that she probably deserved it. Imagine that being the quote that came out of the mouth of somebody who was called to help a child. So that's a way, too, that we can be accountable. And I know you're good at making sure that you report and do what's right. So,
All right, final question. Yeah.
I have a question. I guess it's for all of you. I'm not a very good speaker, so I'll try my best. My wife and I are in the middle of an adoption. We'll foster to adopt. At what point is it not a good idea to keep on trying to keep the child with the family? Because all we hear about is we get the opportunity. I'm sure all of you know how it works. You get a phone call, this is what's going on, you get your hopes up, oh, we're going to give them to the family member. And then you hear what happens to that child after they give them to the family member, or what's happened before that. And here we are trying to provide that child. I'm in the same position as you are, where I'm retired military. I don't need any money. We don't need any money. We're trying to take off with the state's load and give that child a future. But we don't get a chance to, because it's always a good idea, which you said, Senator. It's always that they have it in their mind that it's better to keep it in the family than anything else, even if it's a bad idea.
So what I think we were discussing is foster care. What you're saying is you want to adopt. So you want to give that child a permanent home. I think we need to make that distinction. And I think I hear the pain in your voice. That's a difficult situation. I don't have the answer, but I do know that, and I think that there needs to be a line that's drawn that you had enough opportunities to prove that you really wanted to have that child and love that child and give it every opportunity, when you have a perfectly healthy couple that wants to do the best thing for that child. I'm not the expert in this, but I hear you, and I want to see what we can do to work together. I don't have the right answer, the golden answer, because I think every case is different. And I think it's going to be one of those where we have to bring a lot of more experienced minds together. But I think when I talk about it, the family is the problem that I've seen is children that bounce from foster home to foster home to foster home to foster home, when possibly there may have been a perfectly loving aunt or uncle or grandparent that would have loved to have them. That's what I think, where for sure the child is better off typically with family.
I want to, feel free to hang out after this program and ask more questions. But at first, let's let's wrap it up. Let's thank our panel. Please help me thank them. Representative Josey Garcia, Senator José Menendez, Tom Molnar, Lori Duke, and Mercedes Bristol. Thanks so much. And thank you for watching, and we will close this down. Thanks so much.